The flight attendant held her phone with a grip of white-knuckled certainty. "Officers," she said, her voice sharp and clear. "There are 2 black girls with fake tickets on the plane." The words, spoken by lead flight attendant Sharon Mitchell, sliced through the quiet hum of the cabin. She stood at the head of first class, her face a mask of righteous indignation, her finger pointing like a weapon toward row 2. There, in seats 2A and 2B, sat 2 small figures, 10-year-old twin girls. Their faces were streaked with tears, their small hands clutching each other in a desperate, silent plea. Moments later, 2 police officers moved down the narrow aisle of Flight 227, their boots heavy against the plush carpet. Passengers craned their necks, whispers rippling through the rows like wildfire. What was happening? Who were they for? "These children have fraudulent tickets," Sharon announced, her voice rising to cut through the murmurs. "They are in first class illegally. Arrest them." The cabin erupted. Some passengers leaned forward, hungry for the drama. Others shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting away, desperate to remain uninvolved. At the center of it all, the 2 little girls could only sob. "We didn't do anything wrong," cried the girl in 2A, her voice cracking with desperation. "Our tickets are real, please." Her sister nodded frantically, tears streaming down her round cheeks. "Please don't take us. We just want to see our daddy." Sharon Mitchell let out a harsh, bitter laugh that sent a chill through the cabin. She crossed her arms, her posture radiating absolute certainty. "They're lying," she said coldly to the officers. "Look at them. Do you really think they belong in first class? Their tickets are stolen or fake. Remove them now." A man in row 4 nodded. "Finally, I paid good money for my seat." Across the aisle, a woman whispered to her husband, just loud enough to be heard, "I knew something was off the moment they boarded." The police moved closer. The girls pressed themselves into their seats with nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. As an officer reached for them, a few passengers actually cheered. Others looked away, their silence a deafening accomplice. And the 2 girls, innocent and terrified, could only cry and pray that someone, anyone, would believe them. But what no one on that plane knew, what Sharon Mitchell in her blinding confidence couldn't imagine, what the cheering passengers and silent bystanders had no idea was coming, was that these little girls were not only telling the truth, but they were about to make a single phone call that would change everything. To understand the injustice unfolding on Flight 227, you have to understand the man who was waiting for them. 45-year-old David Morrison was the embodiment of the American dream the country so often celebrates but refuses to accept. A self-made black billionaire who had built Morrison Luxury Airlines from nothing into one of the most respected carriers in the world. He was the product of 15 years of 18-hour days, of being told no 1,000 times, of proving himself over and over while others had opportunities served to them on silver platters. But all the success in the world couldn't fill the void in his heart. 18 months earlier, David had lost his wife, Catherine, a beautiful white woman who had loved him fiercely and stood by him through every struggle. Lupus had taken her far too soon, leaving David to raise their twin daughters alone. Isabella and Sophia Morrison, 10 years old, were identical in appearance but beautifully distinct in spirit. Isabella was thoughtful and inquisitive, always reading. Sophia was bold and quick with a joke, a friend to everyone she met. Both were smart, well-mannered, and carried themselves with a quiet confidence their parents had instilled in them. On this particular morning in Miami, both girls were buzzing with excitement. It was their father's birthday, and for the very first time, they were flying alone to New York to surprise him. David stood in his home watching them pack, his heart doing something it rarely did. It hesitated. He owned an airline. He'd flown millions of miles, but letting his 10-year-old daughters fly without him? That was different. "Daddy, we've been over this 100 times, Isabella said, rolling her eyes with perfect 10-year-old flair. "We know the rules." Sophia zipped her backpack and struck a confident pose. "We're Morrison girls. We can handle anything." David smiled, though the worry never left his eyes. A crucial business meeting he couldn't reschedule had brought him to New York the night before. The girls' spring break had lined up perfectly for his birthday. He had arranged everything personally. First-class tickets on his own airline, seats 2A and 2B, right where the crew could keep an eye on them. He'd even called operations to confirm every detail. He knelt before them, taking one of their small hands in each of his. "Listen to me," he said. "You two are the smartest, bravest girls I know. But the world doesn't always see what I see when it looks at you. Do you understand?" They nodded solemnly. They'd had this conversation before. Remember, he continued, his voice thick with emotion, you are Morrison girls. Hold your heads high, no matter what. No matter what anyone says or how they look at you, you belong anywhere you choose to be. We know, Daddy, Isabella said softly. I'll see you in New York in just a few hours, he said, forcing brightness into his voice, and we're going to have the best birthday celebration ever. What David didn't know as he sent his daughters to the airport was that he'd made one small, critical oversight. He had confirmed their tickets, their seats, their unaccompanied minor status. But he had never spoken directly to the cabin crew. He'd never told them who these two little girls really were. He assumed, as so many of us do, that professionalism and procedure would be enough. He was about to learn just how wrong that assumption could be. Meanwhile, in the crew briefing room at Miami International, a very different morning was unfolding. Sharon Mitchell, 52, sat scrolling through her phone, barely listening. After 20 years in aviation, she'd seen the industry change, and she hated most of it. She especially hated working for Morrison Luxury Airlines. She'd never say it directly, but a bitter resentment simmered just beneath her practiced smile. A black-owned airline. A black CEO, younger and richer than she could ever dream of being. Lately, it felt like the world was pushing her aside. Just last month, she'd been passed over for the senior flight attendant position in favor of a younger black woman, someone with half her experience, or so Sharon believed. The airline called it promoting diverse leadership. Sharon called it something else entirely. Her personal life was also in ruins. Her husband had left her for a black woman, and the ugly divorce was draining her finances and her spirit. The new diversity hires are really something, aren't they? Sharon muttered to Robert, a fellow flight attendant who shared her nostalgia for the way things used to be. Robert smirked. Tell me about it. Back in my day, you had to earn your position. Across the room, Keisha, a 28-year-old black flight attendant, shifted uncomfortably. She'd heard whispers like this before. She said nothing. She needed this job. James, a kind-eyed man of 30, tried to change the subject. Looks like we have a full flight. Should be smooth sailing. Sharon barely heard him, her mind consumed by angry texts from her lawyer. When the briefing ended, she headed for the gate, moving on autopilot. Smile, greet, check. A meaningless ritual she had performed 10,000 times. At the gate, a lovely scene was unfolding that Sharon would never witness. Maria, a gate agent with a warm smile, was checking in two little girls. First time flying alone? She asked gently. Yes, ma'am, Isabella replied politely. We're going to see our daddy. It's his birthday, Sophia added, practically bouncing. Maria's heart melted. She carefully processed their documents and personally walked them down the jetway, determined to make these precious children feel safe. At the aircraft door, she found James. James, I have two very special passengers for you. His face lit up. Well, hello there. First time in first class? Our dad wanted us to be comfortable, Sophia explained, adding with the innocent pride of a child. He owns the airline. James smiled, charmed by what he assumed was a child's adorable fantasy. Well, your dad has excellent taste, he said warmly. He led them to seats 2A and 2B, helped stow their bags, and brought them coloring books and apple juice. If you need anything at all, just press this button, okay? I'm here to make sure you have the best flight ever. Isabella and Sophia beamed. This was just as their daddy had promised. They were safe. Then Sharon Mitchell walked onto the plane. Her mind was still churning with bitterness when she saw them. Two little black girls settled comfortably in first class, looking for all the world like they belonged there. A dark expression flickered across Sharon's face. James saw it, the narrowing of her eyes, the tightening of her jaw. She marched to the galley, her voice a sharp hiss. Who authorized them in first class? James blinked, confused. They're unaccompanied minors. Maria from the gate walked them on. Their tickets are legitimate. Sharon's lips pressed into a thin, hard line. I'm going to check on this. And just like that, the wheels were set in motion. An assumption was made, a bias was activated, and two innocent girls coloring pictures for their father's birthday had no idea their world was about to turn upside down. Sharon didn't walk toward Isabella and Sophia. She marched, her heels clicking like accusations against the floor. The girls looked up, their smiles fading at the sight of her expression. Excuse me, Sharon said, her voice dripping with false politeness. There's been a mistake. These seats are for premium passengers. Isabella sat up straighter. We are premium passengers. Our tickets. Let me see your boarding passes, Sharon cut in, holding out her hand. Sophia carefully retrieved the tickets. They were perfect. First class, legitimate, with seat assignments 2A and 2B clearly printed. But Sharon studied them as if they were forgeries, her suspicion a palpable force. These must be mistakes, she finally declared. How did you two afford first class? Our daddy bought them, Isabella answered, speaking the simple truth. A sneer curled Sharon's lip. I'm sure he did. Where is your father? He's in New York, Sophia said, her voice starting to tremble. Sharon crossed her arms. So you're traveling alone, in first class? I don't think so. James stepped forward from the galley, his voice calm but firm. Sharon, their tickets are valid. The gate agent confirmed everything. She ignored him. By now, other first-class passengers were boarding, their reactions a disturbing portrait of society. A wealthy white couple, the Pattersons, stopped to stare in disgust. We paid top dollar for this, Mrs. Patterson announced loudly. This is unacceptable. Another businessman demanded, how did they even get past security? But not everyone was so hateful. Marcus and Diane Johnson, an elderly black couple, understood immediately what was happening. Those children have every right to be here, Marcus said firmly. Mrs. Patterson turned on him. Oh, please, look at them. They clearly don't belong. And there it was. The quiet part said out loud. It wasn't about tickets or procedures. It was about the color of their skin. A few rows back, Jennifer Wu looked down at her phone, pretending to be busy, convincing herself it wasn't her place to get involved. But Sarah Martinez, a lawyer in her late 30s, had a different reaction. She quietly opened her phone and started recording. She knew that evidence mattered. Emboldened by the support, Sharon straightened her shoulders. I'm going to sort this out, she announced, as if she were a hero. She marched back to the galley and jabbed at the phone, dialing operations. This is Sharon Mitchell on flight 227, she snapped. I need an explanation for 2 passengers in 2A and 2B. 2 children with first-class tickets that don't make sense. There was a pause. The operations manager's confused voice came through the line. Those are legitimate tickets, Sharon, purchased directly by Mr. Morrison. Sharon's face went pale, then flushed a deep, blotchy red. David Morrison? Our owner? Yes, the manager confirmed. Is there a problem? Sharon's mind raced. David Morrison had bought these tickets? It didn't make sense. It couldn't. Unless... But she refused to let herself finish the thought. Instead, a new, more dangerous idea began to form. She couldn't finish the thought, because to do so would be to admit she'd made a terrible, racist assumption, and Sharon Mitchell was not ready to face that truth. There must be a mistake, she said, her voice firm. I'm handling it. She hung up before the operations manager could utter another word, before he could explain that those weren't just tickets purchased by David Morrison. They were tickets for David Morrison's daughters. Sharon returned to Isabella and Sophia with a renewed toxic conviction, her denial fueling her aggression. Girls, I'm going to need you to move to economy. These seats are needed. Sophia's eyes went wide with fear. But these are our seats. Our daddy. Your daddy isn't here, Sharon snapped. Move, now. Tears pricked Isabella's eyes, but she remembered what her father had told her that very morning. Hold your head high. You're a Morrison girl. Please, she said, her voice trembling but clear. Please, just call our dad. His number is... Sharon cut her off with a sharp, dismissive gesture. I'm not calling anyone. You have 30 seconds to move, or I'm calling security. That's when Diane Johnson stood up. This was a 70-year-old woman who had marched in Selma, who had fought for civil rights when it could get you killed. She was not about to let this happen, not on her watch. This is outrageous, Diane's voice rang through the quiet cabin. Those babies haven't done a thing wrong. Marcus, her husband, stood beside her. Where is your supervisor? He demanded. Sharon turned on them, her fury barely controlled. I am the supervisor on this flight, and I'm telling them to move. Sarah Martinez, still recording, spoke up for the first time. I'm documenting this, she said calmly, Her phone pointed directly at Sharon. Sharon's face contorted with rage. "Put that away or you'll be removed too." But the two little girls at the center of the nightmare weren't moving. Something had shifted in Isabella. She thought of her mother, who'd taught her to stand for herself. She thought of her father, who told her she belonged anywhere she chose to be. She found a courage she didn't know she possessed. "We're not moving," Isabella said, her voice small but steady as a rock. "These are our seats. Our daddy bought them for us." Sophia, inspired by her sister's bravery, pulled out her iPad. "I can text him right now," she said, her fingers already flying. "He'll tell you we're supposed to be here." But Sharon was faster. She lunged and snatched the iPad from Sophia's hands. "No devices until I verify these tickets are real," she spat, holding it high above her head, well out of reach. Both girls burst into tears, not crocodile tears, but the real, heartbroken, terrified sobs of children feeling helpless and utterly misunderstood. That's when Robert, another flight attendant, decided to add fuel to the fire. He appeared behind Sharon like a villain's henchman. "Sharon's right," he said loudly. "They're probably using stolen credit cards. You hear about this kind of thing all the time." Richard Cole, a passenger nearby, nodded enthusiastically. "I saw a news report about kids being used for ticket fraud. It's a whole criminal operation." Mrs. Patterson gasped dramatically. "Oh my God, they could be trafficking victims. Someone should call the police." The accusations flew like daggers, each one more absurd, each one cutting deeper into two little girls who had done nothing wrong except exist while black. Keisha, a young black flight attendant who had been silent, finally found her voice. "Sharon, this is going too far," she said, stepping forward. "They're just children." Sharon wheeled on her, eyes blazing. "Are you questioning my authority?" And just like that, Keisha's courage evaporated. She shrank back, shame flooding her face. She knew she should do more, but fear, of conflict, of losing her job, paralyzed her. It was a silence she would regret for the rest of her life. James, another attendant, tried one last time. "Let me just call operations again," he pleaded. "We can clear this up in 2 seconds." "No," Sharon shouted. "I'm calling the airport police. These tickets are fraudulent. I am certain of it." She pulled out her phone, her hands shaking with adrenaline and self-righteous anger. "Yes, I need police to gate C7 immediately. We have fraudulent tickets and potentially endangered minors." But what Sharon didn't know, what she couldn't have known in her cruel crusade, was that Sophia had been quick. In the few seconds before the iPad was ripped from her hands, she had sent a single text to a contact labeled Daddy. The message was simple, desperate, and heartbreaking. "Daddy, help. The flight lady says our tickets are fake. She's calling the police. We're scared." In a glass-walled conference room on the 42nd floor of a Manhattan skyscraper, David Morrison's phone buzzed against the polished table. He was in a crucial board meeting discussing a merger that could define his company's future. But when he glanced down and saw his daughter's message, the room, the executives, the multi-billion-dollar deal, it all vanished. Nothing mattered but his children. His face transformed from warm and engaged to stone cold in an instant. He stood so abruptly his chair scraped loudly against the floor. "Gentlemen," David said, his voice deadly calm, "we're done here." His CFO looked bewildered. "David, what's wrong?" David was already grabbing his jacket, moving toward the door. "Someone is threatening my daughters on my plane." He was dialing before he even left the room. "Which flight are Isabella and Sophia on?" he demanded the second his head of operations answered. "Flight 227, sir." "Who is the lead attendant?" A brief pause. "Sharon Mitchell, sir." David's jaw clenched so tight it could have cracked diamonds. "She's fired, effective immediately. I'm on my way to JFK, have security meet the plane, and get every board member we have in New York on the phone. I want them at that gate." He hung up and broke into a run. Back on flight 227, the police were boarding. Officer Williams, a black woman in her mid-30s, and Officer Peterson, a white man in his 40s, made their way down the aisle. Sharon stood proudly, pointing at Isabella and Sophia as if they were criminals. "Officers, thank you for coming," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "These two girls are in possession of what I believe are fraudulent tickets." Officer Williams ignored her and approached the girls gently. her heart aching at their tear-stained faces. She knelt to their level. "Hi, sweethearts," she said softly. "What are your names?" "Isabella Morrison," Isabella sobbed. "This is my sister, Sophia." Officer Peterson's eyebrows shot up. "Morrison? As in Morrison Luxury Airlines?" Sophia nodded frantically, a flicker of hope in her eyes. "Our daddy owns the airline. He bought our tickets. She won't believe us." Officer Williams pulled out her tablet, her fingers flying across the screen. As she pulled up the manifest, the ticket records, and the passenger database, her expression grew darker and darker. She looked from the tablet to Sharon, then back to the girls, her eyes wide with disbelief. She stood slowly and faced the flight attendant. "Ma'am," Officer Williams said, her voice deliberate, "these tickets were purchased directly by David Morrison, the owner of this airline, and according to the emergency contacts listed, these are his daughters." The cabin fell into a stunning silence. You could have heard a pin drop. Marcus Johnson couldn't help himself. "Hallelujah!" he shouted, his voice ringing with vindication. But Sharon wasn't done. She couldn't be. Admitting she was wrong now meant admitting everything. "That's impossible," she insisted, her voice rising. "He would have notified the crew. There's a mistake." Officer Peterson had seen enough. "Ma'am, we've verified everything. These children are exactly who they say they are." Sarah Martinez stood, her phone still raised. "I have this entire incident recorded," she announced. "Every word. It's discrimination, harassment of minors, and abuse of authority." Sharon looked around wildly, panic finally cracking her composure. The passengers who had supported her now avoided her gaze. The officers were staring at her with undisguised disgust. The two little girls she had terrorized were now weeping with relief. "No, no," Sharon stammered. I was just doing my job." Officer Williams stepped closer, her voice now quiet but filled with steel. "You racially profiled and terrorized two children. That's what you did." The truth hung in the air, undeniable and damning. And somewhere over the Atlantic, David Morrison was in a car racing toward JFK, his knuckles white on his phone, fury and fear warring in his chest. A reckoning was coming. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, strained but professional. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a situation that must be resolved prior to departure. We apologize for the delay." The tension in first class was thick enough to choke on. Richard Cole threw his hands up. "This is ridiculous. Just get those kids off so we can leave." Diane Johnson turned on him with the full force of her 70 years. "Those kids," she said, her voice resonating with authority, "belong here more than you do. Their father owns this airline." The words rippled through the cabin like an electric shock. Mrs. Patterson's face drained of color. "Oh God, Robert," she whispered to her husband. "Did you hear that?" The news spread like wildfire. Passengers who had been cheering for the girls' removal were now suddenly fascinated by the ceiling, the floor, anywhere but the eyes of Isabella and Sophia. In the galley, Sharon Mitchell was having a complete breakdown, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The reality of what she had done was finally sinking in like a block of ice in her stomach. "Sharon, what have you done?" Keisha whispered, her face a mask of horror. "Those really are his daughters." Sharon's eyes were wild. "How was I supposed to know? They didn't look like—" James stepped forward, his kind face now hard as stone. "Didn't look like what, Sharon? Say it." She couldn't, because saying it out loud would make it real. Near the front of the plane, the officers stayed with the twins, a comforting presence in the chaos. "Your daddy is on his way," Officer Williams said gently, smoothing Sophia's hair. "He's very proud of how brave you've been." Sophia looked up, her eyes red and swollen. "Is he mad?" Officer Peterson let out a short, humorless chuckle. "Oh, he's mad, but not at you two." 45 minutes passed, the longest of Sharon Mitchell's life. Then, through the terminal windows, a sight that silenced the entire plane. 3 black SUVs pulled onto the tarmac, right up to the jet bridge, an arrival reserved for dignitaries and emergencies. David Morrison emerged from the center vehicle like a force of nature. He wore an immaculate suit, but it wasn't his clothes that commanded attention. It was the aura of controlled fury, of a father's protective rage. He was flanked by his COO, Patricia Freeman, a woman who looked like she could dismantle a company with a single memo. His head of HR, James Chen, tablet already in hand, and his legal counsel, Marcus Thompson, whose very presence screamed lawsuit. David boarded the plane, and the cabin went utterly silent. His eyes scanned first class, sweeping past the gawking passengers, until they locked on two small figures near the front. Isabella, Sophia. His voice broke, just for a second, revealing the father beneath the billionaire. The girls launched themselves from their seats and ran down the aisle as if their lives depended on it, as if he were the only safe harbor in a storm. David dropped to his knees on the floor and wrapped his arms around them, holding them so tightly it seemed he could absorb their pain into himself. "Daddy," they sobbed into his chest. His voice was a soft whisper, meant only for them. "Did anyone touch you?" Isabella shook her head against his shirt. "No. But she was so mean, Daddy. She said we were liars." "She took my iPad," Sophia muffled into his shoulder. David kissed both their foreheads, then tapped each of their backs 3 times. Tap, tap, tap. The signal their mother had started. "I love you, I love you, I love you." Then, still holding his daughters, David Morrison stood, and everything about him changed. The gentle father vanished. In his place stood the titan of industry, the owner of the airline, the man who would burn the world down to protect what he loved. His voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Where is Sharon Mitchell?" She emerged from the galley on shaking legs, her face as pale as death. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. "Mr. Morrison," she finally managed. I can explain." David's voice was ice cold. "Explain? Explain how you terrorized my 10-year-old daughters? Explain how you called them liars, accused them of fraud, and threatened them with security? Please, I'm listening." I didn't know they were your daughters," she stammered. "You didn't tell the crew." "I shouldn't have to," David interrupted, his voice dangerously low. "They had legitimate first-class tickets. They had identification. They did nothing wrong. But you decided they didn't belong here. Why?" "I was following protocol." Marcus Thompson, the lawyer, stepped forward. "No, you weren't. I've reviewed the passenger recordings. You violated 6 company policies and at least 3 federal regulations regarding the treatment of minors." David took a step closer. "I'll ask again, Ms. Mitchell. Why didn't you believe my daughters?" Silence. Thick, suffocating silence. David answered for her, each word a hammer blow. "Because you looked at 2 little black girls and decided they couldn't possibly belong. You saw their skin color and you made an assumption. You saw a problem to be removed." Sharon was openly crying now. "That's not fair." "It's completely fair," Diane Johnson called from her seat. "We all saw it." David's eyes scanned the rest of the crew. "Who else participated in this?" Passengers began pointing at Robert, who was trying to disappear into the galley. David's gaze found him like a predator spotting prey. "Name." "Robert Chen, sir," he whispered. "I was just supporting my colleague." James Chen, the head of HR, cut him off. "You're done. Security will escort you out." 2 officers moved forward and removed Robert from the plane. He didn't even look at the twins as he passed. David then turned to James, the kind attendant. "You tried to intervene?" James nodded nervously. "Yes, sir. I tried to stop her." David's expression softened fractionally. "Thank you. You're promoted. Report to HR tomorrow morning." Finally, his eyes landed on Keisha, standing in the shadows, drowning in her shame. "And you?" David asked. Keisha's voice cracked. I spoke up once, but then I stayed quiet. I was afraid. I'm so sorry." David's response was firm, uncompromising. "You were afraid of conflict while my children were being abused?" David's voice was dangerously low. "That is not an acceptable answer. Fear is not an excuse for complicity. You're suspended pending review." Keisha simply nodded, tears streaming down her face, knowing she deserved every single word. Then David Morrison turned, his presence commanding the entire first-class cabin. He addressed every passenger, every witness, every person who had played a part in this waking nightmare. "To those of you who stood up for my daughters," he began, his eyes finding the Johnsons and Ms. Martinez, "you have my eternal gratitude. Your flights on this airline are complimentary. For life." Marcus Johnson waved a dismissive hand. "We were just doing what was right, son." A sad smile touched David's lips. "That's rarer than it ought to be." His gaze then swept across the faces of those who had remained silent, who had looked away, who had convinced themselves it wasn't their problem to solve. And to those of you who said nothing, who watched children being terrorized and chose silence because it was not your business. I want you to think long and hard about that choice. Silence is a confession. Finally, his eyes landed on Richard Cole and the Pattersons. His voice turned to steel. And to those of you who actively supported this, who made my daughters feel as if they didn't belong, you are banned from Morrison Airlines. Permanently. Security has your information. Mrs. Patterson shot up from her seat, her face a mask of indignation. You can't do that. Marcus Thompson, the lawyer, stepped forward with a smile that held no warmth at all. Oh, he absolutely can. It's his airline. Frankly, you're lucky that's all he's doing. The weight of accountability hung in the air, thick and palpable. If you can feel the tension of that confrontation, the sharp relief of justice being served, then make sure you subscribe, because this story is far from over. We still have to see what becomes of Sharon Mitchell and witness the sweeping changes David Morrison is about to unleash. Hit subscribe so you don't miss a single moment. And I have to ask, do you think David went too far or not far enough? Should those passengers have been banned? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'm curious to know what you think, because what happened next wouldn't just reshape an airline, it would send tremors through an entire industry. David Morrison turned back to Sharon Mitchell, and his voice was utterly devoid of mercy. Ms. Mitchell, your employment is terminated, effective immediately. There will be no severance, and I will be filing formal complaints with the FAA regarding your conduct. Sharon's face crumpled. Please, she begged, her voice fracturing. I need this job. I have bills. David cut her off, his words as precise and final as a surgeon's scalpel. My daughters needed safety. They needed basic human decency. They needed someone to believe them. You gave them none of that. Patricia Freeman, the COO, stepped forward. Your actions endangered minors, violated federal aviation regulations, and have done catastrophic damage to this company's reputation. You're fortunate we are not pursuing criminal charges. Security moved in. As Sharon was escorted off the plane, sobbing, her career in aviation destroyed in the span of 2 hours, a few passengers began to applaud. Others just shifted uncomfortably, unsure how to react to the raw spectacle of a life imploding. David held up a hand, and the applause died instantly. Do not applaud, he commanded. This isn't entertainment. This is a failure of our systems, of our training, of basic humanity. The cabin fell silent once more. David turned to his board members, his voice leaving no room for argument. We're having an emergency meeting, right here, right now. The board members, startled, pulled out their tablets, transforming the first-class cabin into an impromptu boardroom. The remaining passengers watched, fascinated, as one of the most powerful men in aviation conducted business directly in front of them. This is the third incident of racial discrimination on one of our flights this year, David stated, his voice tight with controlled fury. The third, and this one just happened to my own children. If I hadn't been their father, if they had been anyone else's black children, what would have happened? Sarah Kim, an older Korean-American board member, answered with brutal honesty. They would have been removed from the flight, traumatized and with no recourse. Exactly, David affirmed. That ends today. I'm putting a motion on the table. Mandatory quarterly anti-bias training for all staff. The creation of an independent review board for all discrimination complaints. An immediate termination policy for any proven act of discrimination. And a passenger bill of rights to be displayed at every gate and in every cabin. Thomas Wright, a white man in his 60s, hesitated. David, that's going to be expensive. David's response was a thunderclap. My daughter's trauma is expensive. Our reputation being built on a foundation of discrimination is expensive. Justice is not negotiable. All in favor? Every hand shot up, unanimous. Patricia Freeman was already typing furiously on her tablet. I'll have the policy drafts ready by the end of the week. James Chen, the head of HR, nodded. All staff will be notified by morning. Training will begin within 30 days. An hour later, far from the cameras and the chaos, David sat with Isabella and Sophia in a quiet airport lounge. His daughters were curled into his sides, emotionally and physically exhausted. Daddy, Isabella asked, her voice impossibly small. Why was she so mean to us? David took a deep breath, choosing painful honesty over a comforting lie. Because, baby girl, some people have hate in their hearts. And when they see someone who looks different from them, that hate spills out. But we didn't do anything wrong, Sophia whispered. David pulled her closer. No, you did everything right. You were polite, you were honest, and you were so brave. None of this was your fault. Isabella looked up at him, her eyes holding a weariness far beyond her 10 years. Will it always be like this? David felt the sting of tears in his own eyes. Sometimes, but not always. Did you see Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, Ms. Martinez, Officer Williams, and that nice flight attendant James? There are good people everywhere. I was so scared, Sophia admitted, and with that, the dam finally broke. She began to cry again, and David just held her tighter. I know, baby. I know. And I'm so sorry I wasn't there to protect you, but you protected each other. You were so strong. Your mama. She would be so proud. At the mention of their mother, Isabella began to cry too. I wish Mommy was here. David's voice cracked. Me too. She faced things like this, you know. People assumed she only married me for money. They assumed your grandfather had forced her into it. She had to fight to prove her love was real. But she never, ever let them make her hateful. That's what I want for you. Don't let their hate make you hateful. Sophia pulled back, her eyes wide with a new fear. Can we still fly? Are you scared too? David asked gently. Both girls nodded. He kissed their foreheads. Then we'll fly together, every single time, until you're not scared anymore. Deal? Deal, Isabella whispered. But the story didn't stay in that quiet lounge. Within hours it had detonated across the country. Passenger recordings flooded social media. Sarah Martinez's video went viral, racking up millions of views. The hashtag Morrison Twins was trending worldwide. News outlets seized the story, with headlines that stopped people in their tracks. Billionaire's daughters racially profiled on his own airline. That evening, David held a press conference, standing before a wall of cameras with his daughters by his side. What happened to my daughters happens to black children every single day, he said, his voice steady and powerful. The only difference is that I had the power to do something about it. But every child deserves that protection, regardless of who their parents are. He paused, looking directly into the cameras, ensuring every word landed. We are implementing sweeping changes at Morrison Airlines. But more than that, I'm calling on the entire aviation industry to do better. He then looked down at his girls. To Isabella and Sophia, you did nothing wrong. The world failed you today. But I promise you, we are going to fix it. Meanwhile, Sharon Mitchell gave her side of the story to the media, claiming she was just doing her job, following protocol, that she'd been made an unfair scapegoat. The public wasn't buying it. The backlash was swift and merciless. Her social media was overwhelmed. Her home address was leaked online, an act David publicly condemned despite everything she had done. She became unemployable in the aviation industry overnight. No airline would touch her. Her career was over. Some called it justice. Others, a tragedy. But on one thing, everyone agreed. What happened to Isabella and Sophia Morrison should never happen to any child ever again. And David Morrison was going to make damn sure of it. 3 months passed. 3 months of change that sent ripples through the industry. Morrison Airlines implemented every promised policy. A zero tolerance for discrimination from passenger or staff. An independent board to review all complaints. The Passenger Bill of Rights was now a fixture at every gate. And 100% of staff completed the new, intensive anti-bias training. No exceptions. Other major airlines quietly began to adopt similar policies, though few would admit they were following David Morrison's lead. But for Isabella and Sophia, policy changes couldn't erase the memory. They were in therapy, working through the trauma of being treated like criminals. For months, David flew with them on every single trip, patiently rebuilding the sense of safety that Sharon Mitchell had shattered. Slowly, the girls began to heal. They kept in touch with their defenders. The Johnsons became like adopted grandparents. Sarah Martinez sent them cards of encouragement. Officer Williams became a pen pal, her letters filled with stories of courage. And James, the kind flight attendant, was now working with HR, helping to design the new staff training. He told anyone who would listen that Isabella and Sophia had inspired him to never stay silent again. Then, 6 months after the incident, something remarkable happened. The girls told their father they were ready to fly alone. David stood with them at the Miami airport, his heart lodged in his throat. "You don't have to do this," he said softly. Isabella looked up at him, a fierce determination in her eyes. "We want to. We can't let one mean person take away our wings." Sophia nodded, adding words that made David's breath catch. "That's what Mommy would say, right?" Tears welled in David's eyes. That's exactly what she would say. He walked them to the gate, where new procedures were in place. Every unaccompanied minor was now treated with extra care, dignity, and attention. And standing at the gate was a familiar, friendly face, Marcus Johnson. He had retired, but now worked part-time for the airline, specifically requesting to work with children. "Well, look who it is," Marcus beamed. "My favorite passengers. Let's get you two taken care of." When they boarded, the lead flight attendant was waiting for them. It was Keisha. Reinstated after extensive training and probation, she had proven she had learned from her catastrophic failure. She knelt down to the girl's level, her eyes overflowing with sincere apology. "Isabella, Sophia, I failed you. I stayed silent when I should have protected you. And I promise you with everything I am that will never happen again. You are safe with me." The girls nodded, accepting her apology with a grace no 10-year-old should ever have to learn. They took their seats, first class of course, and this time the other passengers smiled. One woman leaned over and whispered, "You're the Morrison girls, aren't you? You're so brave." The flight was perfect, uneventful, exactly as flying should be. Isabella and Sophia texted their father the whole way, sending updates and selfies, messages filled with excitement, not fear. When they landed safely and were met by their grandmother, Sophia sent one final text. "We did it, Daddy. We flew. We're okay." Sitting in his New York office, David stared at his phone as tears streamed down his face. He typed back, "You're more than okay. You're extraordinary." And in that moment, David Morrison knew. The world had tried to break his daughters, but they had done something far more powerful. They had refused to stay broken. They had taken back their wings. They had shown everyone that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's flying anyway. Isabella and Sophia Morrison weren't just survivors, they were warriors. And their story had just begun to change the world. If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and share it with others. We'll see you in our next video.